tonight we do the story of Jacob, which um, I need to get a little set up here, um, which is a lot. I think any of us probably who did any Christian education at all know a few of the stories of Jacob, I imagine. Um, Particularly, we would know the story of Jacob's ladder, maybe, or we've heard the song, We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder in one form or another. But maybe before we go to Jacob, just a little bit on story. Um, Helen, in her introduction to her book called The Inner Story, which is the place I think that the story of Jacob first appeared. Her book, The Inner Story, but she writes a little bit about story and saying that the essence of all religions has always been expressed in stories, and that the Mass itself is a story. And so that all religions have wanted to tell the stories of the changing relationship between human beings and their gods. And they tell of the search for the divine meaning behind their lives. She quotes Harold Goddard from his book, The Meaning of Shakespeare, and it's a quote I
Mhm,
imagine
mhm.
many of us have heard. The destiny of the world is determined less by the battles that are lost and won than by the stories it loves and believes. It is in part by our response to the great stories of the world that we too can begin to find, each of us, this individual story, expressing the symbolic meaning behind the facts of our fate and behind the motives that determine the day-to-day choices of our lives. That's Helen from The Inner Story, the introduction. So, Jacob. Jacob and his brother Esau were twins, according to the story. And according to the story, they started fighting even before they were born. And I was thinking that maybe they were fortunate because their shadow shared the womb with them at all the levels. And it is said that they were opposites. One was red and hairy, and one was smooth and pale. One was a strong hunter type, and one was a sensitive, thoughtful type. I mentioned in the newsletter that there are themes that get my attention, like blessing and red and birthright and theft and blindness. And I don't know what got your attention, but I just wonder, I'm just going to open it up now to see how we want to dive into the story. What got your attention? Was it one of the sort of themes that kept going? Was it something else? Where do we start?
The wives.
Ah,
I didn't realize you could have more than one wife at the same time in the
oh,
Old Testament. Oh, my. Rachel and Leah.
Rachel and Leah. Yeah, yeah.
Think that sense of kind of no place to rest is what kind of struck me. That seemed to get repeated more and more towards the as the essay went on. That sense that okay, now I've arrived. I've done this sacrifice, but then it only leads to greater hardship and suffering. I don't know if it's just because of the times seem full of hardship now, but That struck me.
Like over the course of a lifetime, there used to be songs like that, like "This world is not my home. I'm just passing through," or whatever. It's just, or that life is hard. I mean, and it goes from, is that what you're saying? Sort of one hard thing to the next one.
Yeah, like each chapter in Jacob's story is, there's obtaining the blessing, which you'd think would be sort of a happy ending, but it leads to, and it is the desired thing, but it leads to more hardship and more challenges, and that sense of sort of from the Rilke poem, wrestling greater and greater angels. And he
Yeah,
had so much hardship and grief, and his mother
yeah.
too.
I think I was really interested in her continuing to see the symbolic meaning of for example, we tend to think of stealing as, oh my goodness, we shouldn't steal things that aren't ours. And the whole thing about when we dream about stealing, we're getting something that belongs to us by having to take it. It's seemingly in a immoral way, but it's not immoral on the deeper level. It's what we need to do to claim our birthright, So,
So,
I,
go
I
ahead.
also like the idea that you have to do what is prohibited.
yeah.
It's essential. I think that's what you're saying.
Mhm.
It is essential for your growth, for your individuation.
Mhm.
Prometheus, for instance.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
I was struck by the theme of twins and how
Yeah.
it's sort of right out the gate. It's the sort of theme of two brothers, and there's
Mm.
this
Mm.
kind of
Mm.
it's an integration that's required, but you never get away from a sibling. You always have a sibling. I was just sort of like, wow, this isn't something that you get over. So he doesn't get over. He's just
Mm.
always accompanied by him.
Yeah.
Well, and also that when even though he felt he was scared to meet him because he felt he had stolen his birthright, Esau was fine. It's kind of like, yeah. And they still couldn't live together, though. They still had to have separate lives, but yeah.
Hadn't thought about blessing in these kinds of ways before. I found that really intriguing, meaningful, challenging.
Mhm. Mm.
We can we can claim a blessing that wasn't supposed to be ours, yet and it's costly. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
I love that she pointed out that feeding Esau red pottage, is that how you say that word? But sort of feeding him the food of his natural food was the way to be in relationship with him, rather than starving him or kicking him out.
I was I, caught by that too, that he's offered food that would nourish his desirousness, and satisfy that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think that theme of the nature of the red and every time that color comes up was really interesting. Um, I was reminded of a talk I saw Anne Ulanov give once, and she's a Jungian analyst and writer, and she was talking about the nature of evil actually, and drawing this parallel. She had a like water heater, an old water heater replaced in her home, and it got all this red rust everywhere. And there was just sort of like this red dust that she was living with for a while. And she was trying to draw this parallel that like if you don't sort of name and contain and honor the nature of evil, even give it a seat at the table, it can become kind of a miasma that spreads everywhere. And I kept coming back to that when I was trying to think about, the way that Esau, he can't go away. He does need to be fed and dealt with. You can't kind of get away from your brother in that way, even if you do kind of steal a birthright from him.
Mhm.
And the trick is really to give like to like rather than to try to change the nature of that person or whatever.
You don't put it in the White House.
Say it again, Karen. There was little interference. At least I heard a little. Just say it again, if you would.
Said, but you don't put it in the White House. You don't elect Esau to be president of the United States. I was taken really by how prescient she was. I'm sorry that she was so prescient, but she tends to be. But so much of what she was saying in those early pages about Esau, about the red man, and what happens when the wrong person is put in the wrong place that isn't right for his special nature or her special nature.
But something
Yeah.
good can come out of it, and that is action by the people. Not the courts, they're not strong enough. Not even Harvard. And I'm going to send money to Harvard. Not the legal profession, but the people, we, us.
Well, and I think
I
it
was
presents.
actually more taken, despite what I just said, I was more taken by how this essay deepened my understanding of one of the first dreams that I had when I started going to the farm, which in retrospect really was just an amazing preview of my next 30 years. But I spent the last 30 years really trying to understand that dream more fully, and nothing has helped me so much as this essay. I mean, my hair was on fire as I was reading it, like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And, I had kaleidoscope with me all the time, every time I was there and at home. That essay was always mine to read. And maybe I did. But if I did, I didn't read it like I did this time. I didn't get it. I became ready for it. So whoever picked it out, Joanne, is it you? Thank you.
And I assume you were spelling getting ready for it, READY, and it wasn't REDDY, right? That's just it's funny when you start hearing a word like red, I just hear it everywhere.
Could have been both at the same time.
Yeah. Sean, were you going to say something a little bit ago, or is it past its?
It might be past. I was just trying to think
Okay.
with the orange metaphor, but I'm looking on 234, and it's when Jacob is now ready to meet his human brother. So my first thought was there's still this call to humanize and recognize the human, even in people that we might think or choose not to have as our political leaders or brothers.
Yeah.
But then the next paragraph goes very telling. The second full paragraph on 234 says the next pitfall into which Jacob could have fallen now opens before him. Esau, the simple, exuberant fellow, is sure that all quarrels forgotten, they can settle down to live side by side and have a fine time together. But Jacob's discrimination does not fail. He replies vaguely, I'll come later. And he makes sure they don't live side by side together because he knows he can't have this person in his household. And I thought that was interesting. There is a recognition of the humanity, but then there's also a putting in its place. It's maintaining a boundary. It's having that discernment and discrimination about that nature of Esau.
Yeah.
And not letting him have that blessing that was coming through the family.
Yeah.
And the difficulty of that when this is an inner figure rather than an outer figure, how do you do that kind of discrimination?
Yeah.
This is such a poetic love song to the process of coming to consciousness and healing those inner splits. I confess I've been reading her for 10 years, but this is the first time I've read this essay, and I'm so moved by it. It's so clear, it seems so clear to me. So thank you for choosing this one.
You said that so beautifully. Would you want to take us to one of those places, or is that?
Oh, I've underlined. So I'll read. So she begins by talking about the knowledge of good and evil and the inevitable split between person and person and between ego and shadow within a person. And the struggle with the dark brother, which every human being must encounter on the long road to the healing of the split.
I think you're on 224,
That's
right?
correct. First paragraph. So she's telling us where she's going with this. The second paragraph at the bottom, what really caught me is in the infancy of consciousness, this separation is necessary, but if maturity is to come, it must not endure. If the unacceptable regressive tendencies are thrust, and this is the inner, are thrust completely out of sight, out of mind, they do not therefore cease to exist.
Yeah.
Either we hand them on to our wives, our husbands, our children, and our enemies or friends. It just amuses me, the truth of this.
Yeah.
Or we are eventually swallowed by them ourselves. And so, she continues to open this up and talks about how Jacob has the ability to hear the inner voice. This is the next page, 225. And his mother recognizes the importance of this. And the contempt, the contempt that Esau had for those firstborn rights, which are sacred, and he didn't hold them as sacred, and so she knows that this must go to Jacob and not to Esau, and she's willing to pay the price, and Helen Luke talks about feminine suffering as we give up the thing of the most value, and Rebecca pays quite a price for her choices to help him get the blessing. I love the line on 226, where she talks about the blessing and the meaning of it. Um, it's the handing on of the light. It's page 226 at the top. The handing on of the light, the spark, whereby a man becomes aware of God's voice, of the divine within himself. And skip down to the last sentence. Its effectiveness must depend on the state of receptivity in the one who receives it. So, this, she goes, talks about the difficulty that Isaac had in making the decisions about his son. It's very interesting to me.
Like he couldn't do it,
He
right?
couldn't do it. He was very passive in it, but also didn't resist what his wife conjured up. And then she references how the repeated theme of the blessing is bestowed not on the good or dutiful, but on the sinner, on Jacob, on David, on the prodigal son, on Paul.
So now I think you're at the top of 228, right?
228,
If you're
yes.
following along.
Yes. And in the second paragraph on 228, the necessary suffering and repentance are experienced before the blessing is given. In the primitive story, the blessing comes first, but the long years of payment are implicit in it. Only those are blessed who consciously or unconsciously at first have consented to this payment. This is an entirely different thing from the dangerous assumption that the end justifies the means. She has such a ability to discriminate between surrendering to this inner growth and process versus controlling it and getting our just desserts, so to speak. So down in the second to the last paragraph, the question then is not whether Jacob was a good man or had earned the blessing, but whether he had the capacity to hear the voice of God and the courage and devotion to risk everything, reputation, safety, even relative goodness, in order to follow in obedience. I'm just so moved by this.
And that next line too, we're down at the bottom of 228, however unattractive we may find Jacob's character, he did have that devotion that was just described.
Yeah. I mean, this just, the way this unfolds is, to me, just, I don't know when she wrote this in terms of all the different essays that I've been so gifted with, but this is just beautiful. I'm so glad you chose this. And I don't know why I haven't read this up until this point, but I've got everything.
I've never seen it read at Apple Farm yet either. So this is our first Apple Farm group around this story. So this is
I had not read it before.
It's beautiful.
That one little thing you said about either passing it down or passing it on or having it swallow us. I was thinking that's what happens when things get passed down through the generations, people avoid the burden of becoming conscious by passing it on to their children. And then they may be reprehensible, but they don't have to suffer carrying that, bringing that, whatever it is, to consciousness, bearing it consciously.
Was it Jung who said that the great burden for children is to carry the unrealized dreams of their parents?
Yeah.
Those dreams all come with a cost, but
Mhm.
not realizing them also comes with a cost.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also was really caught by the bottom of page 233,
Mm.
where she begins to talk about how the blessing doesn't mean it's all, rainbows and unicorns. Those aren't her words, those are mine. And she talks about this wrestling Jacob did, and without this, we would not be able to stand it. We would rise out of the weakness of our humanity into the hubris of fancied equality with the gods. After a new insight, there are two dangers. Either an inflation of the ego may possess us, or we may fall into discouragement, imagining that the insight means that we ought now be free of all our old inadequacies. The lameness accepted cures both these delusions. Indeed, we may feel even more inadequate than before on certain levels. And I'm reminded of, in her autobiography, Helen Luke talking about that. Even towards the end of her life, struggling with those inadequacies that she referenced, and just a humble humanity of this. I just saw a crossover there.
Mhm.
I think she really gives us a gift when she says on page 235, and she expands this: those who carry the blessing will inevitably meet great suffering inwardly. I think when people are not prepared for that, or not cognizant of that possibility or probability, it's such a shock.
Well, she talks about how Jacob had to pay, or he had, let's see, had consequences. So she named three, I think, four. So if we just flip through these on 229, the first consequence for Jacob was that he had to step away from his mother. Um, and I think he didn't ever see her again. Am I right about that? She didn't ever see him, so I take it that he didn't ever see her either. Is that right? So there's one consequence. And the second one is on 230, about the middle of the page. When he goes to his uncle Laban's house and expects to marry Rachel, and he is given her older sister Leah first. So I think that's the second consequence that Helen names. And the third, I think, or she calls it a pitfall then, is on 234, but it's the part in the story where he goes to meet Esau. The next pitfall into which Jacob could have fallen actually now opens before him. And then the fourth one is on 235. Um, Rachel is pregnant again. But he needed to travel, and she died on the travel, in the traveling. So he has to suffer in the place where it most hurts, in his sensitive feeling nature. This is on 235. He was his mother's specially loved son, and the mainstream of his life lay in his intense personal loves. These, one by one, he must lose. So first it's Rachel. But just to think about that, in the inner life, or even just as a fact of life.
Framing it that way, Joanne, it just makes the kind of conclusion about detachment there in that paragraph on 235 even more poignant because, he's lost connection from mother, from Rachel when he had to form the marriage with Leah, from Esau, and then when Rachel dies, it's very poignant. He's lost connection, and then she says at the end of the paragraph on 235, detachment does not mean freedom from love and suffering on the personal level. It means the full opening of the heart to their power and the experience of them, not as an insignificant personal emotion, but as a part of the whole meaning of creation. Detachment is the cessation of personal demand, not the deadening of feeling. And it just makes me think, his consequences have kind of taught detachment
Yeah,
through some serious suffering.
yeah.
And I think the last one you're thinking of too is Joseph. He has a lifetime away from Joseph, right? Because he realizes he has the
Mhm.
blessing too.
Yeah. She doesn't tell the Joseph story, but his favorite son, and Joseph had this coat of many colors, and brothers were all jealous, so they sold him. So he disappeared. I mean, that's the short story.
Goes to Egypt.
Okay.
So this story of selling Joseph is sort of the flip. It's the light that's banished, not the
Yeah.
red. Um, and his story is such a rich story. He goes into a prison and knows how to listen to people's dreams. This
Yeah.
brings him to the attention of the Pharaoh, and he becomes, quite an important person in that culture. And but it's the banishment of the light side is interesting. It's just an interesting juxtaposition to me.
And the theme of blessing circles around again by the end of the essay around that story, where Helen speaks of Jacob's blessing of Joseph uh, is among the most beautiful.
You want to take us there, Dawn? So we're looking at what you want to do
236.
235 or 6? Okay.
Yeah, I was just pointing out where Karen
Yeah.
had noticed so beautifully that Joseph's abandonment, being sold off by his brothers. Talk about incomplete family crap. This is it. And multiplied, and how it worsens through the generations. The offense can worsen.
Mhm.
This brotherly animosity, this refusing to look at the shadows in ourselves and our families. But by I don't want to skip over that, the depth of that and how terrible that is. On 235, the story right about the middle, this third full paragraph is about this. Right after Rachel has died, Jacob's love now centers on Rachel's son, Joseph. Joseph alone of his sons, Jacob knows, has inherited the inner ear, the capacity to accept the blessing. But he's sold away. And as far as Jacob knows, there will be no opportunity to bless him because he's gone. And Benjamin becomes his last son, the son that was born of his wife's death in childbirth. And yet, by the end of page 235, the last paragraph, so Jacob journeys to Egypt to be reunited with his son. And he sums up the characteristics of each son, each future tribe of Israel. It is sheer poetry, and most fittingly, the story ends as it begins with a blessing. We'll quote first the blessing of Jacob himself as it was understood by Isaac with his limited consciousness. God give thee of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be everyone that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. Which, to my ears, might be a powerful blessing, but I wouldn't want it. There's a lot of conflictual stuff going on in that blessing that I wouldn't want to shoulder. Be Lord over thy brethren. Ooh, I don't think I want that responsibility. Maybe that's truly part of the blessing he needs to receive and enacts ultimately. But wow, it makes me shudder. But then Helen goes on right after that to say, finally, here are the profound and lovely words of Jacob's blessing of Joseph. Right, so he had received a blessing from his father that was rough and ruddy, let's say, and now Jacob's giving a blessing of Joseph, which seemed to sum up the distilled wisdom of his whole life. Here's a man who's become conscious, who has worked through at least a great deal of, or some of, his journey to consciousness. And he says, or Helen says, distilled wisdom of his whole life, the blessing, we could say, which may fall on everyone who is willing to be separate, to stand alone before God. The Almighty who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. Wow, that's a blessing. It's also rather awesome. So significant, but it feels to carry the weight of the movement of generations and the progress or evolving nature of Jacob's having invested and suffered and seen and accepted and lost and grown, and Joseph having had responsibility and animosity and the unresolvedness of brotherly relations and victim of their conniving, their plot to be rid of him, and the divine somehow prevailing despite all of this, so that Jacob can come around again to this young man and say these words, which, as Helen said, may fall on everyone who is willing to be separate, whether it's imposed, I take it as it was on Joseph, or whether, as Jacob seems to have chosen his separateness. I'd be interested what other people think about all of that.
I'm wondering how much Jacob knew when he assumed this mantle, and whether he maybe told Joseph too much. I mean, maybe you have to learn it bit by bit. If you're given the full weight of what you're in for, will you take it on?
I
Just a
don't
thought.
think you know the full weight. I think you have a hint that something is expected, and you have to trust to follow the expectation as it works out.
But you don't know the details.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
You
think
don't know
Karen,
you don't know the pain.
You
yeah,
have
I
no
would
idea.
differentiate between the pain and the suffering. We don't know when we reach for that birthright and want the blessing. We don't know what I would differentiate between that and the blessing itself.
You don't know
That
the
is,
sacrifice.
yeah, we don't know the sacrifice, neither do we know the potential
Yeah.
of what may arise from the sacrifice.
But we also know we want it and we'll pay for it because we do it. And that's the requires trust.
We choose it consciously. She says sometimes we can fall into it. But Jacob seems to be choosing it.
Wanting doesn't quite sound right, right? There's something about conscious choosing, but I don't. What do others think? Does wanting sound right for that, or there's a choosing, but it doesn't. It sounds like a difficult choosing in some way, or a calling, or a
Um,
feeling compelled, or a karmic necessity. I don't know, but I'm not sure about wanting.
can I be heard? Am I muted?
No, you're good.
Okay. On page 233, when he's wrestling with the angel, or what we call the angel, a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. Brief but intensely vivid, what an extraordinarily moving account it is of a man's struggle with the unknown in himself. It expresses his absolute determination to know the stranger, to prevail, to find its name. He realizes that the seeming enemy is the one who can bless him, this time individually and from within, not ritually and from without, as in his early unconscious days. And this statement, I will not let thee go except thou bless me. What a great prayer. I will not let go until you bless me. Okay, I thought that related to what I was just hearing, but maybe not.
Well, I think, then he goes on to limp the rest of his life from that. So I think it does fit in with what is this something wanted, or what's the language for this?
I would say accepted. That's not wanting. It's
That's
accepting though.
But the last sentence says it should not be inferred from this the stranger was God himself, but rather that the new blessing revealed for a moment the face of God.
Is choosing that in the sense that he doesn't give up.
Oh.
He doesn't stop, right? I mean, you could have just said, okay, you win, or called a pause. What do kids do when there's too much time out or something? No, he keeps at it through the night.
I think on 229, at that last paragraph again, after he leaves his mother and he sets out alone. So for the first, I think I'm just piggybacking on what you just said, Dawn. For the first time, he must act and choose without his mother. One may imagine his loneliness and doubt as he journeyed, wondering surely if his deception of his father would invalidate the blessing, if he would be rejected by God. Thus, everyone of goodwill, after a big step to freedom involving perhaps a great hurt to a much loved parent or friend, will look back in fear, wondering whether he or she had been merely self willed to no purpose. Then I love this next part. Jacob lies down for the night with his head on a stone, as though perhaps he would say, whatever I have done is hard fact. I will accept. Lay my head on this hard reality. Then the heavens open and he sees the angels ascending and descending. And God speaks to him, and the blessing is confirmed. That's when it happened. I guess blessing was confirmed. He knows intuitively the constant exchange between heaven and earth. So then he's going to build an altar on that spot.
I happen to be reading right now a book that John Troyer pointed me toward about the call to creativity, I think it is. And it's by Linda Leonard, who is a Jungian and therapist. And it beautifully describes, and it reminded me of of a kind of parallel to Robert Johnson, which some of us have been reading, Between Heaven and Earth. Well, Leonard's book, she talks about to be creative, you have to be able to risk moving between the conscious and the unconscious. You know, the creative dives, that's my word, not hers, into the unconscious to see what's there, but not to get lost there. And she speaks of the need for a sentinel kind of figure who can help us not lose ourselves or evade that. Uh, and then there's this need to bring it to consciousness. And this is the work of the artisan who brings it forward somehow. Reminds me of what you just read, Joanne, about the heavens opening and seeing the angels, and they're going up and down this ladder. I always wondered, what is a ladder about? You know, but thinking of it as the movement between conscious and unconscious, perhaps, or maybe there's something else. There's something higher even than consciousness. Divine. I don't know. What do others think of what that movement is?
What's interesting that when he sees that, that's when he declares his great work to build a temple or a house of God on that spot. So he witnesses that and is moved to that sort of like work of his lifetime that even gets him to the point where Rachel loses her life because he travels to do that, right?
Oh yeah.
So it's a big calling when he witnesses that exchange between heaven and earth.
Creative burst of sorts comes from him. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. That's great
I think
connection.
I think I was just reading last night because I was looking for something in the Such Stuff as Dreams Are Made On. And I think toward the end of her journaling, Helen talks about that going up and down on the ladder. And it is bringing consciousness and unconscious together. And it's that work. Because going down, of course, is into the unconscious, and up is, and they have to be brought together.
So on,
Oh, yeah, I think you're muted.
oh,
Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. I said, considering this story and some others, I'm reminded of the opposites. With a generational blessing also comes a generational curse. I don't think we can separate opposites, the ladder up and down, the twins, the good and bad. To me, it's always with the blessing is always the curse is always present as well.
Ophelia, do you mean by curse that the red one, the shadow one, the other side of ourselves? Is that what you're thinking of in this case, or something else?
Well, a generational curse, a generational blessing, it seems to be that this that a lot of this is passed down. It's tradition or blessing, or it comes without your permission. You're born into, to the situation, but along with the blessing, there's along with the positive, maybe I should say, there's always the negative is there, and I think of blessing and curse, because had I been uh, Jacob, I would consider a lot of things that happened to me. It was happening. It seemed like it was a curse, as well as a blessing. Uh, whether because it was a lot of underhanded stuff, you know, going on. In order to get to the positive, we have to go by way of the negative, and you can't. It's like the yin and yang. You can't separate the two. They can't be separated. So as we go through life, whether it's the conscious, the unconscious, the positive, the negative, both are always there. But somehow we tend to want to lean more towards one than the other, when they absolutely, in my mind, cannot be separated.
In this cycle of stories, what you're saying makes me think of how Isaac, having separated from Ishmael in that terrible story of Ishmael being cast out, it's perpetuated in the next generation with his sons.
It
And then
started with it started way back with Adam and Eve,
Yeah.
and
Cain.
Cain and Abel.
and
Yeah.
Cain and
Yeah.
Abel. Yep.
Yeah.
It's then if you consider that as a beginning, it's almost like it's been passed down from generation to generation.
Mhm.
Because that song says you can't have one without the other. You can't have the blessing without the challenge, the suffering, the pain. All
Mhm.
of that is a part of it. But as human beings, we try to get away from the negative. When Joseph left, but he was, in a way, he was running away from what he thought might happen to him as a result of what he and his mother had concocted. Um, and he took off, at his mother's urging, to go to stay with his uncle. But that was getting away from avoiding the pain of trying to avoid the consequence of what I've done.
And it didn't work.
Well, you can't get away. That's the whole thing, because you see what he ran into. If we read through the story as he got there with his uncle, like the same you tricked your brother, now your uncle tricked you, and man, I don't know. It's a family thing and a generational thing as well, in the way I look at it. You can't get away. You just can't.
Except I do see development. I see movement in the larger arch of this family story. Not that that ends happily ever after by any means, but Helen's choosing to dwell on Jacob's investment efforts, the initial conniving with his mother, and yet it turning about. It's not all neat and tidy with a bow at the end, but he has made strides. It feels that way to me anyway. Not that that meant that his son Joseph didn't fall into a pit or was thrown into a pit by his brothers and more complications arise. I feel in the Bible like there are always complications. Just when we work out one mess of things, here's another one. Which is kind of like my life, by the way. I think every time I take a couple of steps forward, I'm not hit backwards as much as I'm all of a sudden facing something that I didn't see this coming, you know? Uh, and it's always more difficult somehow than what I just thought I was working my way through. Sometimes it's related even, but anyway, I want to think, maybe it's my wishful thinking, Ophelia. I want to think that there's movement of some kind. It's not all done and finished by any means. The messes continue, but there is some kind of something.
What you call making strides, I call making adjustments. As I move and think we can't see the future, but whatever comes, whatever I'm faced with, I make an adjustment, for that. I guess you could call it strides. Um, but I think I can't speak. Sometimes I say we all, but it's a part of the human condition. But I can only speak for my own experience, and I realize that my experience is not um, identical to, but I have to bring myself. Sometimes I have to just rip the S off my chest and realize I'm not superwoman. I'm just another human being on the planet, and the things that I'm grappling with or the things that I'm dealing with are probably common to humankind. And that, I don't know, that's comforting for me because so many times I feel nobody else is going through what I've gone through, or nobody else facing what I face. And yet I read a story like the story of Joseph, or all the way going back to Adam and Eve and coming all the way up through to Noah. Uh, that it's just a part of the human condition and a part of me. Like I think you mentioned, we don't want to face the shadow and that part of ourselves. But I think who wants to suffer? I guess people who are sadistic, or I guess there are some people who enjoy suffering. I don't know, but I'm not one of them. And I think we we want to feel good all the time, want everything to go right. We want to be righteous. I don't even want to admit that I'm imperfect and that how can I judge someone else when in fact I'm not perfect and probably guilty of the same stuff I'm pointing the finger at. So, but I think a lesson here for me is that you reap what you sow, and you can get by, but you won't get away because sooner or later it's going to catch up with you. And then to be okay and to be able to see that. And, I think to me it'd be easier to accept when I can, I guess, make strides, or when I can see uh, that I don't have to get all jacked up because I can face the reality that these things that are coming upon me is a result of some of my own making, some of my own bad decisions and not so nice behavior. And here it comes back to bite me in the butt. And I can be okay with that when I know
Right.
what it is.
Well, I noticed in this on 233, right in the Karen, you were reading some of this and you might have read this part too, but it's in the wrestling with the stranger. Um, and then down about 3/4 of the page down, um, when Jacob finally dares to ask the ultimate question. So yes, I think you read this. Karen, tell me, I pray thee thy name. Then the blessing is given. Then the hidden name cannot be humanly spoken, but as in other myths, the issue hangs on the asking of the right question at the right time, though the answer may not be given. Did you get that far, Karen? I don't remember. But did you comment on that? Because I don't, am I being redundant here? But there is.
This is such a powerful section here. I just, Jacob knows that in this long struggle of love, he has seen God face to face, and his life is preserved.
Not be inferred from this that the stranger.
You know, he will remain lame. He will remain lame, and we are human and must so remain. If we dare to wrestle, as Jacob did, we may be in some way crippled in ordinary collective living.
I bet we all know stories out of our own lives or others about that if we would just think about that. And yeah, I just think it's something worthy of pondering when we leave. Um,
Yeah, it really links back. Um, I love how at the top of this page 233, he must meet with his brother as with his own soul, face to face, alone and unarmed. And he's at the brook. So there's this crossing over that's going to happen. But first, alone, he will spend the night wrestling with himself, with his fear, with his inner shadow brother. There will be no trick about it. He must find the deeper blessing. And she says, brief but intensely vivid, what an extraordinarily moving account it is of a man's struggle with the unknown in himself, or a woman's struggle with the unknown in herself. I just
Do you
think this
think
is
it's
extraordinary.
yeah.
do you think it's really a choice as much as thrust upon us, just as we're thrust into the world through birth, whether we choose or not? I think this path is before us.
I do think it's a choice. We can choose not to do it. And I think it will be worse.
If you choose not to do it, you still got to face something.
Yeah.
So you
You can either walk or be dragged screaming and kicking, right?
yes,
Well, it
because
seems
we're here.
Yeah.
Or
it
if you
seems we are
ignore it,
having the opportunity to see what happens when we don't choose to listen to the
Yeah.
inner. And I think I'm going into Joseph Campbell's territory, but man, that puts you you're in the hands of the gods at that point. Ooh. Talk about drag, walk or be dragged.
Yeah.
thinking of how if we don't choose or if we refuse to take up what is before us to do, I think that is when it may transfer to the next generation or to our neighbors or friends or enemies. And it finds a way to bounce around somewhere.
Mhm.
So yeah, by my ignoring it, I mean, I feel responsibility to try to clear out some of the family stuff that I inherited for the sake of my children, quite frankly. I've done a lot of conscious, some of it's been sweet and good, but a lot of it's just really hard work. And I've put it off. uh, but I've seen how when others before me put it off, it made it worse for someone, for me, someone, others around me. And so yeah, there are things that we inherit that are just they're just there. But I can choose to make something of them. I can wrestle with them and ask for a divine something to come out of it, please.
Could I take us back to that last blessing for a second? Would that be all right with everyone?
Sure.
Um, so I just got curious, right? Because there was the blessings of thy father have prevailed, ... And I was curious, so what are those, what's that ... say? What was not there? And I actually went to the Torah instead of a translation of Genesis from a Christian Bible. And this is what those two verses read. So 25, it's the God of your father who helps you, and Shaddai, which is another one of the Hebrew names of God, who blesses you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that couches below, blessings of the breast and the womb. The blessing, period. So, and then, so I was like, okay, so what's, all the different names of God have different translations and meanings. And so I looked up Shaddai, El Shaddai, and that's often translated. The thing that's interesting with the Torah and Hebrew and everything is that there's always multiple meanings of the words, sort of different ways that it can be translated. And that's what all the commentary is about. Mm-hmm. Shaddai is often translated as Almighty, the Almighty. But there's another perspective of it, that Shad, the word that forms the base of that, the word for that is breast. So it's a very feminine sort of, some people view it as like a feminine face of God, El Shaddai. Mm-hmm. And so it was just interesting to look at that. And if you read that blessing, then it perhaps could be like the God of your father who helps you. Okay, so that's one part of the blessing he's giving him. But then he goes on, and Shaddai who blesses you. So it's almost like, is this, and I get them mixed up. So it's like Jacob is almost, you could say he's giving a blessing to Joseph that is of both his lineage, but also there's this piece about of the feminine as well, perhaps, which is just kind of interesting given all the earlier stuff that Helen has about the mother and her part in the awakening and all that stuff. I just thought I'd throw that in there because I thought that was really kind of interesting.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And yeah, just look at that. There's more maybe in that blessing of, anyway, I think
just richer. Well. Like, I mean, on another, yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I think unless there's something burning to be said yet, which you can, but we're at the end of our time, really. Well, I guess we would have a couple minutes, but seems like that's a good place to stop at this very rich conversation. Stop this rich conversation. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.